Hello and welcome to another Wrestling Roundtable discussion podcast. I'm Adam Wilbourn from WhatCulture, joined by the Dudley boys of WhatCulture, Michael Hamflett and Michael Sidgwick, to discuss another burning wrestling issue. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of this sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling on either iTunes or Spotify for daily wrestling podcasts where we review Raw, SmackDown. We have reviews of pay-per-views, roundtable discussions more like this, interviews, and a roundup of the week, complete with a bloody good quiz, of course, on WrestleCulture. But gents, what I want us to discuss today is AEW. There's been a lot of talk about them in recent weeks, of course. It's ongoing with people hinting at potentially moving there from company like WWE or New Japan or wherever, or then picking up indie performers. There was obviously the recent revelation about how fast Double or Nothing sold out, and the fact they're probably going to have to move venues to compensate for that because it's sold out so quickly and the demand is there. There's all this speculation about AEW's TV deal. So with all that in mind, should WWE fear AEW?
No.
There we have it. Thank you very much. No. Because it's I mean that in two different ways, I suppose. Because one could argue, a bit like some people tried to when TNA moved to Monday nights, that it would spur WWE on to make a better product. Do you think that's the case?
No. Right. This is a big myth that's been propagated from like a lot of corners of like the wrestling fandom. Is that finally, like, if there is competition, and this is the closest we've been for 2 decades, I would say at this point. Well, nearly 2 decades. Obviously, WCW was around for a little bit shorter than that. No, it's not going to awaken the sleeping giant because the giant isn't asleep. The giant's absolutely thick.
And it's bigger than ever.
It's bigger than ever. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't get the narrative that AEW is somehow going to make WWE a better product because it's just fundamentally broken. And it doesn't matter which writers they might draft in. I know they've been fattening up the old producers' rooms with like Jeff Jarrett, and such an influx of like amazing, outstanding talent that's coming in to the point where there's nowhere left for them to work except evolve. It's loaded with talent. All of this is immaterial because everything is ultimately unilaterally decided upon by Vince McMahon. So I don't think WWE is going to get better by the mere virtue that AEW exists, nor does AEW's existence threaten WWE's. Do you want to know why?
Go on.
Love you, Simon Miller. People, in contrast, will hate me for that. As much as I would like to believe in the sheer power of narrative, and there must be something in AEW selling out 10,000-seat arenas, which if I was sat in this chair last year and someone told me, oh, by the way, a new promotion's going to come out and it's going to shift 10,000 tickets twice in 2 years, it was inconceivable. It really was. And there must be something in the narrative of AEW gathering so much cult momentum while in parallel, WWE is just plummeting in terms of fan relations and popularity by so many metrics. You can go on a news website in the next 2 weeks and just read a headline saying WWE renews TV deal in Bahrain or Australia or Germany, and then it brings into focus just how vast this empire is. Like, the big take around AEW is that they've got like a prestige player in North American TV, and that's all well and good, and it can possibly compete on a national front, but internationally the reach is just too vast.
I actually think that AEW's rise, as Cedric points out, like the idea that we could even speculate on any company, let alone like some wrestlers banding together, but an organisation with initials and a real name and a real vision, like presenting 2 wrestling shows that are going to sell out 10,000-seater arenas, reflect to me that the sort of complex boom period we're now in, WWE reporting its highest ever earnings in the last quarterly financials, it's almost become ordinary to read that now because that company just makes money on top of money on top of money. And yes, we know some of it feels a little bit ill-gotten, or certainly not gotten in the way that it was.
Saudi Arabia?
Not gotten in the way it was gotten 20 years ago, not gotten through pay-per-view buy rates or ticket sales or merchandise sales or any of that stuff. It is making money in a different way now, which of course is going to drive the creative process differently. So to suggest it's going to fear AEW in the way that they might have feared WCW Nitro going head-to-head with them in 1995 is farcical. However, what I think they should be mindful of is the fact that if a company can thrive, or at least appear to thrive, as AEW has early doors, in this new boom period and WWE continue to do well, they should probably be aware that there's more space than ever before for other promotions to exist in people's hearts and minds and wallets. They're probably not going to lose fans that they care about to All Elite Wrestling or New Japan Pro Wrestling or any organisation locally while independent scenes do well. But they can certainly be aware that younger fans might just prefer another brand of wrestling. WWE have always patterned themselves as the Disney of professional wrestling. If you're talking about wrestling, if any of our non-wrestling friends or family ask us about it, they're more likely to say, "Oh, WWE."
It's a synonym.
Yeah, exactly. It's a synonym for pro wrestling. They're more at risk of that being challenged than they are anything financial or anything that will really touch Vince McMahon. And it's people within the organisation that are probably more mindful of these outsider forces. I hasten to call them threats, but these outsider forces that could round on WWE's command of the wrestling audience compared to Vince McMahon, who will look at lots of pieces of paper with lots of zeros on.
Yeah, I suppose the catalyst for this discussion was a chat you had earlier on today in the WhatCulture office. And just, you know, for all the hype that we put with AEW and all the excitement that is legitimately there, and the potential sway on wrestlers who may not be happy in WWE or independent wrestlers who may be weighing up both, I think the conclusion we came to is, like we almost said there, WWE aren't going to go out of business regardless of what AEW does.
No, absolutely not.
And nor is that the narrative anymore. That's something that Eric Bischoff quite enjoyed massaging during the height of the Monday Night Wars. But that's not even in the conversation now, is it? Even Chris Jericho, the big worker, was the only one to use the phrase "change the universe" at the original AEW rally. You'll note that none of the other elite guys that have been...
I think the Bucks have.
Have they started doing that?
I think so, yeah.
I sensed from early on that none of them were particularly going to go for WWE's throat so much as they were going to say, we're going to give fans, you know, they've just been broad about this, fans a different brand of wrestling to watch. They're not doing that at the expense of WWE. They're just suggesting that there's something new that fans would like instead. Bischoff was very keen, you know, and as he would admit as much in countless documentaries and podcasts that he gets out of that era, that he was doing things in direct opposition to them to test the waters to see if it would work differently. I don't necessarily think that's All Elite's mission statement.
How much do you think WWE has an eye on All Elite Wrestling?
But this is the strange thing, because even through the few remaining objective metrics we have left, there's very little chance of AEW competing on any kind of level to WWE. They are demonstrably very frightened, and we know this from reports, like harkening back to last year, in which they offered money to Tommy Dreamer to shut down, what's his, House of Hardcore?
House of Hardcore, yeah.
Like, we've seen a similar sort of overhaul, reimagining, if you want to use their euphemism, of the UK independent scene. Like, there are promotions that realistically, if this is any other industry, if you look at WWE in how much they've monopolized it, and you can make the argument that no other industry is monopolized like WWE has monopolized professional wrestling, this company is still worried about very small time independence in Britain. Not even their home base. Like, this is a company that is really worried about insignificant players, and this is a significant player, so I can only infer that they are worried about them.
I think AEW could be the first to fall victim to WWE's throttling of independent scenes, because they've got to, as we've seen with their sort of looking towards China and trying to already from the off suggest that we're going to provide different wrestlers, different product than what WWE can offer. The more WWE get their hands around the neck of independent scenes, not just in the UK, because that was obviously a test market, wasn't it, around the world, that shortens the talent pool that's going to be available to AEW, which in turn shortens their opportunity to try and create something different. What I will say for All Elite Wrestling is that they haven't yet booked a show, and the indirect threat has been made apparent, we have to assume, based on things like the Revival's release turning into a tag team title run this week, or Rusev's apparently want out resulting in half a push this week. You know, they might get bored of that. Everything is speculative. But from everything we're reading from trusted sources, and all we can go off is trusted sources such as the Wrestling Observer, is that the indirect effect that All Elite are having before they've yet to even ring their first bell of the first match is that it's reminding talent that there might be more to life outside of WWE. And unless guys were willing to gamble on themselves with the likes of New Japan or the likes of the independent scene, I don't think that alternative was quite as obvious several years ago, and potentially AEW right now are in the best position to present an alternative. If Double or Nothing doesn't work or the television product isn't outstanding out the blocks, straight away they will look less like a viable option for wrestlers that may be indifferent or slightly bored with life in WWE.
Isn't it fair to say that the WWE already has a massively bloated roster? And even if, all these want-away stars that we hear about on a weekly basis are allowed to leave, which WWE don't seem to be keen on doing, and obviously have these ironclad contracts that they are going to hold people to, isn't an argument there that it still won't really affect WWE that much because the core guys that they've got are still going to entertain audiences? If they had the same roster, if they didn't bring anyone else in or even trade shows or move people up or whatever, you could still make an intriguing WWE product in a year if they lost all the people who wanted to leave already. Is there not the case that regardless of whether or not these want-away stars leave or not, whether they're allowed to or not is a different issue, it doesn't really matter to WWE? And if they allow those want-away stars to leave and they go away and succeed in AEW, is there also an argument there of you've let them go to train them up again to probably, because you've got more money, potentially, I know who AEW's backers are, but potentially to just bring them back when they're at the height of their popularity again?
Theoretically, under different creative stewardship, and I firmly believe this, I know it might just be the magic of the way NXT operates, which is just incredible at smoke and mirrors. Theoretically, you've got in Velveteen Dream, at 23 years old, the progress he's shown and the creativity he's shown, you've got, 10, 15 years of a top star out of someone who's got that magnetic, alluring charisma that might actually move the needle. This roster is incredible from NXT all the way up. It's just unreal. There is so much talent on it. So, yeah, I think that even if the mooted names do actually leave, they've just got an army of guys who could, under the correct creative stewardship, excel. I don't think talent is the true battlefield here. I think WWE versus AEW isn't the true battle. The key driver behind both enterprises is TV money. And the only thing that WWE has a battle on its hands with, and we're looking ahead 5 years at this point, because that's when the Fox and the renewed USA deal runs out, is TV versus streaming. Because if streaming continues to accelerate while TV decelerates, WWE's key revenue stream is in danger of really diminishing. And if you look at every other metric, house shows are down, ratings are down, but it doesn't matter. The network has so far comprehensively failed to match in terms of revenue what the traditional pay-per-view model did. It's all on TV. AEW's got little to do with the long-term health of WWE. Even if it is competition, it's all about TV.
In terms of precedence as well, WWE is sort of like a mutant cockroach that only gets bigger with every scorched earth. Every time that it's looked like the business was in the bin or a challenger has come their way, and in terms of TNA, let's say in 2010, you can use challenger in the loosest sense, of the word. WWE tends to thrive in the aftermath of things. They'll survive the challenge, they'll survive the case brought against them by another philosophical direction of a wrestling organisation or the financial muscle in the case of WCW in the 1990s, and come out of it looking better for it. They are so well set up. The smartest thing that Vince McMahon did when the Monday Night Wars were at large and when WWE was growing was that he took the company public and he made that a bedrock for pro wrestling for the future. He made his company effectively future-proof. So I can actually conceive this idea that All Elite Wrestling has this incredible boom and bust period where it gets like a TV deal that ultimately it struggles to satisfy and it lasts a year and we all have a wonderful time as fans and it looks like it's Brave New Future, and then things just go wrong and the wheels fall off. WWE will then be in better shape as a result of it, just as we're witnessing now them pick the bones of TNA, whether it be through talent or network footage or anything. They've now got that carcass to pick at, to take all the few bits that we briefly enjoyed about TNA and weave them into the history of wrestling as they are the gatekeepers of it. That could well be what we're dealing with All Elite in 2 years' time. But as Michael Sidgwick says, 5 years feels a long way off, but that's another 5 years where television is going to change profoundly. We were talking over the desks before coming in to record this. Netflix haven't yet experimented with something like a rolling 52-week contract. They'll leak shows onto Netflix now like television would, where you have to wait a week for one episode at a time, but those are on like 12-week shows or say like 23-episode seasons. Imagine if All Elite were to have a really successful maiden year and then Netflix were to come at them and say, why don't you try a year with us? And then if that goes well, we'll give you another year. Netflix's promotional muscle behind it. In everybody's house for $6.99 a month. Even if you were just investing in that for All Elite Wrestling and you didn't care about films and television, it's costing you less than the WWE Network every month. Something like that has a chance to leave a real footprint in people's lives, more so than WWE with less and less people watching.
We mentioned there about AEW potentially spurring WWE on to make a better product,
No.
and that's not the case. But is there an argument to be made that AEW could bring back some fans who may have slipped away from wrestling, let's say, even more than the usual casual fans that you would expect to come back around at Royal Rumble WrestleMania season, the fans who've disappeared from watching wrestling? Is there an argument to be made that AEW could open up the doors to them yet again, and then arguably they could then be funneled into watching WWE, or when we eventually see the change at the top of WWE, be convinced that this is a fresh new beginning for this product as well? Could it be beneficial for WWE in more ways than one, basically?
I can only use anecdotal evidence here. But whenever I talk to my friends who are lapsed fans, and like I've got friends from like my school group, like I'm talking about like 15, 20 years ago at this point, and like friends I've met more recently who've used to love pro wrestling, particularly in the Attitude Era, they don't miss wrestling. Like the wrestling was largely incidental to them. They miss what we all miss of WWE, which is the grand spectacle, the great stories, the great moments that arrived after consistent long-term storytelling. Like one of my best mates called Craig Thompson, he hasn't mentioned wrestling to me in ages other than to exchange the odd Vince McMahon or Jim Ross impression on a stag do. And the only time in the past however many years he has messaged me saying, "Cor, have you seen this? What's happening in wrestling?" is when the McMahons announced their return at the end of last year. Like, people want WWE back. They don't want an alternative to it, in my opinion, from anecdotal evidence.
I think you've hit on a point there, and I think that's maybe what I was trying to arrive at earlier on. Eric Bischoff doesn't get enough credit about one particular thing, if you ask me, when it came to what happened with the NWO and how that became so successful. He didn't necessarily like reinvent the wheel, but the NWO hit upon a section of the fan base that had completely disappeared. You don't get a Monday Night Wars where, let's say, for argument's sake, 6 million people are watching wrestling, where you've got 3 million watching Raw, 3 million watching SmackDown, and then, you know, people switching sides depending on the angle at the time. There wasn't that vast quantity of people watching in 1995 and 1996 in the first place. They just all picked WWE, or they all picked WCW, but more and more fans came back through knowing Hulk Hogan and knowing that he turned heel and being aware of Razor Ramon and Diesel and wondering why they were on the other side. That was kind of as WWE's audience grew, WWE didn't drastically decrease. There was just more fans that were coming back to watch the wrestlers that they remembered and see them doing something a little bit new. And then it was WWE's job to pluck them and take them back. So I think, as Sidgwick says, wrestling just isn't necessarily as an important factor to those particular fans, but they bring such huge financial muscle back to the product. And if AEW can find them, and I don't know the answer to finding them because plenty of other wrestling organisations have tried and failed. What we have at the moment, the closest comparison I can think of would be New Japan and Ring of Honor coming together to force WWE to move their NXT show just to be on the safe side with Madison Square Garden this WrestleMania weekend. But other than that, no wrestling organisation has found yet, since probably Vince McMahon bought WCW, a way to captivate and entertain in the way that it feels like AEW are on the verge of. But is Kenny Omega that? Probably not. Are the Young Bucks that? Almost definitely not. Is Chris Jericho even that? I think that's the biggest question. I think he will either prove to be the guy that he believes he is and the guy that they can take to meetings to suggest, look, we're a big-time product. Without him, is there a single star out there that could be that guy in his place? Because I don't think it's Randy Orton and I don't think it's Rusev.
Finally, having dealt with that issue, I think we would admit that WWE don't fear AEW and are very much just going to keep an eye on it and arguably not even try and
Threatened by, but not fearful of.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to counter-program as a result of what AEW does, like they used to do back in the day, for example. Having said all that, to flip it over, Is there a danger, despite how well we've seen AEW be set up and already be run so far, is there a danger that AEW down the line, let's say, after a few successful pay-per-views and maybe a decent TV deal, is there a danger that AEW overreach themselves in trying to compete with WWE?
I can't speak to that because it's not an actual entity yet. One thing I will say is that if I'm WWE management, and thank God I'm not, as much as I'd be a little bit frightened of this because, you've got someone like Randy Orton going, I'll speak to them. Or even if you're looking at the bank and going, if any of these guys are smart, they're going to speak to AEW to leverage a better deal out of us. And I know they've got cash to spare, but they're enough of a player already to sort of make someone like Randy Orton, who's, if any performer other than John Cena is in that WWE bubble where they don't know anything beyond other wrestling apart from what's on a GIF on their Twitter, that then go, well, that's a dive and that's absolutely stupid. The fact that Randy Orton is aware of their existence and is using them to either reinvent his career or just get more money out of his only promotional home of his heart, that means they're a viable thing. And as much as that's the case, if I'm WWE management, I'm looking at AEW and going, God, it would be great for us if you fail. If you fail, it would be so good for us, because to think of how this thing's like materialized. As I said earlier, if you had said last year that a company is going to draw 10,000 fans and it's not WWE in America, I would just, no, it's absolutely impossible. Like, that's what made All In so magical. That's what gave it the very name of the show. And if you think what happened here, All In basically created a gigantic visual for TV stations to go, all right, okay, wrestling, that's not WWE, but it's still really big. Hang on, we can make money off this. And it needed like this ridiculous convergence of like borderline magic and genius promotion to even get on the negotiating table of a prestigious North American TV station, to even have them consider looking at wrestling as a thing, because sponsors hate pro wrestling. It's considered lowbrow, and there's like so many barriers, and it's like prohibitively expensive production wise to get on TV. To even get on this negotiating table to TV is an absolutely massive get for All Elite Wrestling. If this fails, considering the promotional genius behind it, the creativity behind being the elite, that's built this brand and got into Hot Topic, and with all the great wrestling that the hardcore fans want, Kenny Omega is doing 7-star matches and he's now in AEW. He didn't even entertain WWE as far as I'm concerned. You might say otherwise. Politically, I don't think he did. I think it was all set on All Elite Wrestling. This ridiculously perfect storm of how to create this grassroots upstart pro wrestling promotion is a vaguely mainstream proposition. If this fails, then you'll not for years and years and years see another attempt made. Like, it's impossible.
And like, this to me is why it's such a fascinating story. And like, this is going to feel like a call to arm in the comments section, because I do read them, and it's not just about all our physical impairments. There are actually comments when we talk about All Elite Wrestling with fury and anger that I don't understand. And the only thing I can rationalize about that is that WWE have got such a tight grip on the narrative that they've almost institutionalized a section of the fan base to not want to see another promotion do well. Now, let's just pretend that AEW don't remotely care about any sense of competition. There is nothing inherently wrong with another organisation being there on offer to fans. Vince McMahon would like to tell you that he believes in the free market economics of pro wrestling, so ergo he should be happy with lots of promotions doing his thing slightly differently. He doesn't think that. We all know that. But as wrestling fans, that's exactly what we should support. It does not bother me if people out there don't like it when we wax lyrical about New Japan Pro Wrestling, because they're allowed to just enjoy WWE just as we're allowed to enjoy New Japan. But the choice should be there for all of us. For anybody that would listen to this or would watch previous videos on AEW and think, oh, well, it's rubbish and it's going to be terrible, and why we're doing Ambrose sign, why doesn't he just stay with WWE, and blah, blah, blah. All those criticisms that we've all read, and some people, I dare say, will feel as they're listening to this. Why? Why think like that? It's got to be because WWE have made it clear to you that they're the only game in town. And any time one of these companies come along, or any time somebody dares to even put a crack in this really forceful shield that WWE have built up, it's got to be for the betterment of all of us. Because if 1 week Raw is too draining, or SmackDown's booking lets you down, or you're not terribly convinced by some of the also-rans on NXT, if there's another show that week that can keep you entertained, and New Japan World is too hard to navigate, then
it bloody well is.
then let all
ridiculous,
Elite Wrestling be your guideposts. Let them exist for the betterment of all of us.
And the talent?
Yeah, and the talent. And that's just something that I think, if that's the one thing they can do, is remind audiences that have only ever known WWE or nothing. If they can remind audiences that this is how it could and should be, then that's all the better for all of us. So it would, like I say, it's a bit of a call to arms just to say, at least support it, at least work with them, as long as they're, theoretically giving you something you can enjoy. If this product fails, then you can stand aside and say, I supported that and it failed and it's a shame. Don't be ready to bury it before something's even happened, because it is better for all of us.
I think it's going to be a fascinating few months of development as we get more into AEW's business plan. We find out more about TV deals and what have you. And I think this conversation and argument between the two factions, especially in terms of fan base, will go on and on. So let us know your thoughts in the comments section below, or you can tweet them at us on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. Well, actually, you can follow all three of us. You can follow Michael Hamflett at
Michael Hamflett.
Follow Michael Sidgwick at
Sidgwick.
You can follow me at Adam Wilbourn. As I said, you can follow us all at WhatCultureWWE. Don't forget to subscribe to What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes or Spotify for daily wrestling podcasts. And my thanks to the Dudley Boys. Thank you for watching, and we will see you soon.
People tend to misspell my surname, it's been a problem forever. So just in case, for all the hundreds and thousands of you out there who just can't find me, it's MS-ID. No, I can't even spell my name. MS